Hello everybody, welcome back. My name is Curseof and welcome back to another video. Today we are here for a bit of like a meta discussion overall on the current speed duel format. This is obviously the post Jinzo format here, even though I am North American based. Online tournaments are the main tournaments, and basically all the online tournaments have Jinzo. So that is the format we are going to be discussing in this video here today. And yeah, honestly, things are getting very, very interesting in the speed duel format because today's discussion is Moth's reign officially over? So, for those of you who have either been living under a rock or you're brand new to the speed duel format, welcome to the format and welcome out from under your rock. Moth has been the reigning deck, the reigning emperor of the speed duel format for the last at least 2 formats, and this would be the 3rd format here. Back in Trials of the Kingdom format, Moth was basically the only deck. There was just a bunch of different variants, and it was topping every single event and basically winning every single event. Then we had the Twisted Nightmares and Match of the Millennium format, where I think some Moth variant won almost every single tournament that format. I think they only didn't win maybe 2 or 3 of the major tournaments that were held, which is absurd. And now moving into this format, which is the post Jinzo format, yeah, we're still thinking that Moth is going to be the best deck. If you guys didn't see the tier list that me and Terramaster did, it'll be linked up in the cards right now. Go check it out. But we basically said that Dark Moth and Warrior Moth, or any really Moth variant, are the best decks of the format. But, who knows, we might have been wrong. I'm basically going to discuss with you guys during this video what's happened to Moth, where it is currently in the format, how it's performing, and is Moth's reign over. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and start off with the tournaments and their results so far this format. I'm going to be talking about the 4 major online tournaments that have been held. It's not going to be including locals and stuff like that, since most of the locals that are being held for speed duels have like 4 people participating at a time, so they're not really worth mentioning right now. But yeah, going off into the first tournament, I'm actually going to mention the least relevant of the 4, being the single elimination tournament that was held. Obviously, single elim is very different than Swiss plus top cut, so I think that one's we're going to knock out of the way first. And I will go ahead and flash the top 8 and top 4 decks by you here, but I'm mainly going to mention the first and second place deck lists, just where once again it is single elimination. But as you can see here, there's a couple Twisted Warrior decks showing up, and we have a couple Moth decks. I'm going to stop at this one here by Juan, I think that's how you pronounce the name. Dark Moth siding into Conflict Warrior. That's very, very interesting. Very, very cute. I like the idea a lot. Just, that nice smoke screen into Conflict Warrior can really throw off some people. And yeah, overall, super sick to see. Cool little top 4 deck. And we continue here, Insect Stall, that's been showing up a bit as well. And in second place, we see a Dark Moth variant, 5-dimension TCG. And then in first place, we see Twisted Warriors. Let's go ahead and start off talking about this here. So, first place, we have a Twisted Warrior deck by Jimin. It is 3 Gearfried, 3 Command Knight, 3 Newdoria, 3 Offerings, Twister, Dust, Zoma, Wheel, and a cute little side deck. Honestly, makes sense. But already, this is obviously the tournament that I'm counting the least, but we already have a tournament where Moth is not reigning supreme. Moth did not win this tournament. Now, it did manage to get second place. It is a Dark Moth variant, and it is being ran by 5-dimension TCG, which you guys will eventually come to realize is the most consistent performing Moth player this format, I believe. I think he's the only one that has been truly consistently topping or just being knocked out due to tiebreakers. But we do see him here right away in the second place finish of this tournament here, which is very, very cute. It's basically your standard Dark Moth. The main thing that I'm going to mention here is Offerings to the Doomed. A lot of people aren't running Offerings to the Doomed in their Moth decks. I think you need to run Offerings to the Doomed in your Moth decks. If you don't, I don't think you're playing Moth right. And yeah, that's going to be because of another deck that we're going to mention very, very soon. But I think this was actually the second tournament to finish up this format. Once again, just single elimination, mostly Twisted Warriors and Dark Moth. So nothing too crazy here, right? So far, fairly standard. Let's go ahead and move on to our very first Swiss tournament here. So, the very first Swiss tournament that was held this format was the one by Justice, Judgment Gaming's Judgment Duel Series tournament here. And I think it was 18 participants, I think. Somewhere between 18 and 20 participants. And they did have a top 8 cut here, so we're going to go ahead and start off with the top 8. We have myself here with my top 8 Spellproof Armor deck list. Basically your anti-Moth list, because once again we're going into the format assuming Moth is the reigning king. Yeah, honestly, the best way to play the deck. Definitely needs a few modifications from this list, but regardless, you know, it's your anti-Moth deck. Loses to most of the other decks fairly frequently. That's why you side Conflict. Then we have the very first Insect Stall build to do well. You guys seen another Insect Stall build in the single limb tournament. Okay. Dark Moth. Twisted Warrior again. Once again, actually the same guy that won the single limb tournament. Then we have another Dark Moth. Another Dark Moth. Another Dark Moth. And then we have Art LeQuint here, once again playing Twisted Warriors. So now we have 2 events that Twisted Warriors has actually taken out from Moth. Moth has came out in 2nd place, the Dark Moth variants did. And Twisted Warriors have won these events. Okay, that's pretty cute so far. So, right now, a lot of people might actually be assuming that we're shifting towards a Twisted Warrior best deck of the format. I don't think that's true, and I will get into why when we get into the next couple tournaments here. But regardless, me and Terramaster said Twisted Warrior was a tier 2 deck. It is obviously proving itself to be at least tier 2, but I do think that there is a Warrior deck that is better. Let's go ahead and move off into the third tournament here, and I believe the third tournament to actually finish up this format as well, that being Speed Duel League's tournament here. So we got the Speed Duel League tournament deck list coming up here. No Dark Moth in Top Cut. 0. Lots of Warrior Moth in Top Cut, but no Dark Moth. 5-Dimension TCG was actually the only Dark Moth to finish with a 4-2 record and only get knocked out due to tiebreakers. So once again, 5-Dimension TCG being the best performing Dark Moth. He also didn't partake in JDS, so he couldn't top that event. But yeah, so going on here, we have Ryan Atlas here with a Warrior Moth variant. Okay. Then we have another Twisted Warrior deck here. We have another Warrior Moth deck. We have another Twisted Warrior deck. We have another Stall deck. You guys are seeing very, very consistently Twisted Warriors and Stall making it to the top cut with Moth. And like, we're not seeing anything crazy. Just because it's not Dark Moth, there's still Warrior Moth variants moving in here. We then have another Warrior Moth variant. And then we get into the top 2 decks of this format. Or of this tournament, sorry. We have 2, not 1, but 2 Conflict Warrior decks here. We have Art LeQuint playing it, and we have Bylot playing it. I think this is very relevant. I think Twisted Warrior is good, yes, but still, it's a grind game, right? It's not a deck that just comes out and kills your opponent outright. It is a slow, grindy game that you play with a Twisted Warrior deck. An aggro, slow, grindy game, but still it's like a more control-based deck. So the games are slower, gives your opponent a chance to potentially come back and turn the duel around. This deck here doesn't do that. This is the Twisted Warrior deck. This is the OTK deck of the format. Honestly, a deck that OTKs even better than Dark Moth does, in my opinion, which is honestly really, really crazy to mention. So we have Bylot here taking the first place slot, running a Jinzo and a Hades. Hades, I'm assuming, is, gets over your opponent's Jinzos. Well, Jinzo is your main OTK option because it shuts down all of your opponent's trap cards. Absolutely phenomenal. Then we have Artlequint with 2 Jinzos, and the rest of his deck is fairly standard, and then actually siding in a third Jinzo and siding into the Twisted Warrior build, I guess, to go up against Stall most likely. So far, we have the only decks winning, are Twisted Warrior and Conflict Warrior. Let's go ahead and move off into the final tournament of this format, that being my tournament here. We have Stall from SDL Killa. We have an Amazonas deck from Unfair Justicar. We have a Dark Moth deck from Justice. We have, a Dark Conflict deck from Justice. A Dark Moth deck from Dark Fighter. Spellproof Armor deck from Terra Master. Spellproof Armor is also performing consistently here. Once again, 5 Dimension being the most consistent Dark Moth player, dropping off here at top 4. Then we have, once again, 2 Conflict Warriors taking the first and second place. The top one here has 3 tributes. The bottom one here has 2 tributes. I'm going to get into this now. So, I've been discussing around with the community a little bit, and I think there is a fairly clear consensus here that because of Jinzo's release, Conflict Warrior is now a tier 1 contender alongside Moth. Moth has definitely not dropped from tier 1. Moth is 100% still a tier 1 contender, but so is Conflict Warrior. Why? Conflict Warrior's goal was always to OTK your opponent. Even in the previous format, which this top deck here, actually, the one that won my tournament, shows fairly well with like a previous format conflict deck. You got your Gaps, your Hades, and basically your goal is to OTK, but you still have to worry about trap cards, which is a huge, huge issue for the deck. If all back row can stop your OTK. With Jinzo coming to the format, you have a monster that guarantees OTKs, still a single tribute, and shuts down your opponent's back row. This completely changes the dynamic of the deck. This is basically the best support for the dynamic of this deck. Just summon big monster, kill opponent. And it's actually forced people in a position where it's offerings or Sphere Kuriboh to out the Jinzo, and you need to have a follow-up. Otherwise, you actually just lose the game. Because of this is why Moth needs to run Offerings to the Doomed in their deck, because you need to have as many outs to this OTK as possible, so Offerings has become 100% necessary in every deck, and I think so has Sphere Kuriboh here. But now the question is Moth still the best deck of the format? Honestly, I think I'm going to argue no. Here's my reasoning for this. So, Moth is extremely powerful, do not get me wrong. It is a deck that just tributes off your opponent's monster, shuffles back, and draws. It always goes plus. Worst case scenario goes neutral, and that's only if you're facing down a Gearfried or if your opponent is playing Spellproof Armor, which makes the deck absolutely absurd. Way too powerful. Still don't know why we got a skill this crazy alongside Parasite Paranoid, but we did. Absurd card. But there's ways to play around Moth, and we have adapted to Moth a lot here. We have Spellproof Armor, which is a deck that just says, hey, I'm your anti-Moth deck. I'm going to chill here with any monster that I can normal summon, and you can't Parasite it. I'm actually just vibing here. Phenomenal. Then we have Offerings to the Doomed, an easy Moth answer. We have Zoma, an easy Moth answer. We have Prideful Roar, another easy Moth answer. We have lots of Moth answers available to us in this format here. Okay, that's awesome. Plus, any trap card can stop the Moth OTK. And honestly, I think Moth still needs to run double Gap over double Jinzo. Gap just solves Moth's main problem, which is your opponent just setting a monster and saying, okay, you can't parasite it right now. But Conflict Warrior doesn't have these issues like Moth does. Still goes for the OTK in that super big powerful play, takes your opponent's monster, tributes it off, they go ahead and go +1, and now they shut down all of your trap cards. Okay? Plus, if they went first and already had a monster set, now they have 2 monsters on board, and a Jinzo plus any other monster equals an OTK. You cannot respond with trap cards, so your only options are quick play spells and hand traps. This means that Sphere Karibo and Offerings to the Doom have shot up in overall, appearances in decks, because you need these or you just lose to your opponent outright. Along with that, these decks are still running Dust Tornado. They can potentially snipe out Offerings to the Doomed before you have an opportunity to use them. That makes this deck, it doesn't go as plus as Moth, but it makes the format revolve around it basically. It's making trap cards way weaker than they ever were before. It's making Offerings to the Doomed a absolute necessity, and making Sphere Karibo a necessity as well. And it doesn't have that weakness of setting monsters. In fact, a lot of times, setting a monster is great for this deck. If you go ahead and set your Dakoichi, say you're playing a Dark Moth deck, I steal your Dakoichi and I flip it up, I just got a free +2 off of my skill instead of a +1, because I stole your Dakoichi and I'm going to tribute it off. There's my automatic +1 because I just outed your monster for free. Now I'm going to get a free draw off your Dakoichi. This deck has forced people to basically run multiples of Sphere and Offerings. You need both in your deck at all times. It's also forcing people to not play more consistency in their Dark Moth decks, because Dakoichi is actually more of a liability than anything now. In fact, I don't even think you want to run Dakoichi, or if you see your opponents playing Bakura, you basically just do not set Dakoichi because it's that weak to this deck. And it consistently OTKs with Jinzo now. Jinzo has completely shaped this meta. It has killed off a tier 2 deck from the previous format. It has brought Spellproof Armor up to tier 3, and it has brought this Conflict Warrior deck up to tier 1, and I'm honestly really leaning towards this deck being the best deck of the format here. Because honestly, all those Moth answers don't answer this deck. They just don't. And then I'm going to mention one more thing before I clue up this video here. Like I mentioned, every deck now needs to run triple Offerings and maybe a few Sphere Karibo, or triple Sphere and maybe a few Offerings. You're going to need a mix of both, right? So you might say, okay, well, I have the answers to my opponent's deck. They swing in with their Jinzo, I'm going to Sphere Karibo it and run it over. But every deck is running Sphere Karibo. So what if they Sphere Karibo you? Now you didn't run it over. Now you just failed to stop them. Okay, I Offerings their Jinzo, now the Jinzo's off the field. Now, maybe I go ahead and take and summon my Jinzo, or maybe you're not playing that and you go ahead and just drop a monster. Or maybe you're able to Cocoon, or whatever it may be. Well, you're not shutting down their trap cards, so now they have trap cards to answer you, and they also run Offerings and Sphere Karibo. So yes, you can say that you have the answers, but so do they. They can still protect their Jinzo, protect their monsters. And that's what makes this deck so powerful, because even though you're forcing other decks to play these cards, and they're thinking, well, now I have an easy out, but I also still have the ways to stop you with my Jinzo on the field, and I still have easy outs to your plays as well. Honestly, I think that Conflict Warrior is the new king of the Speed Duel format, and I think Jinzo truly is currently reigning supreme, and we definitely are going to need something to shake up this meta, and honestly, just kill Moth and kill Conflict. You can't just kill them, they're too broken. But drop them down in the tier list. We don't want these decks being tier 1 anymore. We need something new and something else fun. But anyway, hope you guys did enjoy this video. If you did, please hit the like button down below and also consider subscribing. I will be having daily content for the last few days of this week and all of next week. I actually have Yu-Gi Kaiba week planned for next week. You guys would know this if you follow my Twitter. Go follow my Twitter. And also head over to my Discord. I host tournaments usually once a month. This month I am taking a break, but next month there will be another Speed Duel tournament. So head over there. I don't know why you're not over there, so it's in the description. Top link, always. Head on over there. But anyway, that's a wrap, guys. I'll catch you guys all tomorrow for another video. Peace.